Tonight we continue our interviews with candidates in this year's elections. Our guest tonight is a first-time candidate from West Roxbury, a member of the Mass Nurses Association. He's also a socialist alternative endorsed by the Green Rainbow Party. We'd like to welcome candidate for City Councilor at Large, Seamus Whelan. Thank you very much for being with us, Seamus.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for inviting me here to talk about my campaign.
Well, before you were a candidate, you were a registered nurse, active in the union. So how did you get from that to being a candidate for council?
Well, I'm still a working registered nurse. I'm active, I have been active and still active in my union, Mass Nurses Association. And I'm running because I'm tired of, I want to put forward an alternative to what I see as the politics as usual. I feel local elections are dominated by corporate finance, corporate money. And my campaign, one thing I pledged that if elected, I won't accept the full salary that a Boston City Councilor takes. I'll only accept an average Boston worker's wage, and the rest I'm going to donate to help build movements, to help working people, and the 99% basically.
You say the candidate for the 99%. How do you see yourself advancing that if you were on the council?
On the council, well, as an individual, it would be quite difficult. But I see a position on the council as being a platform that would allow me to put forward ideas, a platform to support building movements. I believe real change comes about through the building of movements, of people power. And I would use my position to advocate and support that.
Well, I know one thing that I associate right away with the 99% is job opportunities. There are limits on the powers of even all of city government to improve that, but they have some power. How do you see yourself feeding into that?
There are limits on city government, and I feel that's a problem too. I believe a lot of government power in Boston, Massachusetts, is in bodies that are unelected, that are dominated and controlled by corporate interests. Part of my campaign, and one thing I demand is the need for some of these bodies. I'm thinking of the Boston Redevelopment Authority, the Boston Public School Committee, the MBTA, that those bodies should be elected and there should be community control so that the policies they put forward are policies that actually help working people in this state and city.
Well, you mentioned, let's say, with the Boston Redevelopment Authority, you say that there ought to be a different kind of control, more from the grassroots. How do you think that would make things different?
Well, I think the Boston Redevelopment Authority, it's been around for almost 60 years, and generally the way it's conducted itself, it's been a huge help for big real estate and corporate interests. We've seen a history of the destruction of the West End, but the last 60 years, generally working people have come out, not on the best end of that. The people that have benefited more have been big corporations and real estate interests. So I think a planning authority should be structured in a way that there's community control and involvement, and that the policies put forward, are for our interests rather than the interests of private real estate investment firms and corporations.
I know developers love to put up bigger buildings, but at the same time, the bigger the building, the more jobs for people in trade unions.
There are some jobs, but the problem with a lot of working people face in Boston is that Boston's becoming a more and more unaffordable city to live in. And the there's more and more jobs that don't have benefits, and wages are not enough for people to provide for themselves and their families. So there's a downside to all of that. And what my campaign is supporting is a real jobs program. We call for, there's a real need to rebuild the infrastructure in this city, in this state. And at the moment, the corporations, the banks are sitting on the money. They're refusing to lend it to small businesses. They're refusing to invest it to rebuild our economy and rebuild our infrastructure. And I think they should be forced to, or at least penalized for not doing so.
Talk about the schools, because you also want to change who decides which people get on the school committee. Again, if let's say we had an elected school committee, at least partially elected, how would that change things, you think?
Well, whenever I see a body that's unelected, it's generally for a reason. I think a lot of the reforms that are being proposed at the moment, there's an agenda behind those reforms. I think the federal budget for education is something like $500 billion. And you have corporations looking at the moment at public education and seeing this is a cash cow that they can tap into. So a lot of the reforms that are being proposed are reforms to increase the influence and control that corporations have over public education. I support reforms. I think public education need to be reformed. I support smaller class sizes, increased funding to public education. But I don't think that a lot of the current reforms are in the interest of Boston residents and our families.
So you're talking about reforms, would you mean charter schools or school turnarounds maybe?
Charter schools. I mean, we've had No Child Left Behind. I mean, that's been around since, I think, 2002. And a lot of the promises that were made that high-stakes testing were going to improve things, those promises haven't come true. So yes, I think there are some programs that actually work in public education that aren't supported and aren't being funded. Programs like the MEDCO program, which help integrate schools. Things like school site committees that actually give parents a say over the curriculum and an involvement in the schools. The programs that are being pushed now that I feel don't work, and I can understand maybe parents wanting the best schools and the best opportunities for their kids, but I think, similar to healthcare, promises made in the past like HMOs were going to transform healthcare and improve healthcare. I think a lot of the promises being made around charter schools, people are going to be disappointed over them. And I'm supporting what I feel is real change. One other aspect on education is that I oppose totally what I see as the demonization of public school teachers and public school unions. School teachers really have no alternative motive. They advocate for their students like nurses tend to advocate for patients' interests. And this demonization of unions and public school teachers are part of this agenda to allow corporations to plunder public education.
Finally, as someone in the health field, you do have something in common with many of the early responders to the events last week. Anything you have to say about those events and what that means for the city?
I think I'm shocked and like everyone else, just horrified by those events. I mean, it really saddens me. And I think emotions are still very raw at the moment, so it's kind of difficult to deal with that. But one thing that I hope, we've had previous horrific tragedies like 9/11, and what resulted after that, I hope we don't repeat the same mistakes. I hope we don't vilify, blame immigrant community, and I hope we don't fall for this call to take away our civil liberties, our civil rights. But again, I think emotions are still very raw, and I hope we take a deep breath and get through this. One other aspect on that there's been some criticism of that the intelligence services and the police missed the boat in some respects to some of the suspects, one of the suspects at the moment, and. What I've heard another criticism that, we've spent a lot of time, police resources, spying on peace groups, people that are Occupy, people involved with Occupy, that have no connection to terrorism and are just using their right for peaceful protest. I think that's a waste of resources. And I'd like, if we're going to use resources to try and prevent these type of incidents, I hope we use them in a better way and we don't misuse them like we have.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Candidate for Boston City Councilor at Large, Seamus Whelan.